I was not a fan of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Now what I mean is that when the movie came out, I was not initially part of the community that thought this was an excellent film that handled very adult topics in beautiful ways while also having 100 other fantastic features to rant about. For full disclosure, I very quickly became part of that community, but I very distinctly remember leaving the movie theater thinking, that was pretty good. And that was it. After having a year to think it over, I definitely think that it's a cinematic masterpiece. In fact, I think that The Last Wish is commentary on what I am dubbing the 2020s movie crash. Before we begin our adventure, let's take a look at the map. The desert of desensitization, the icebergs of artistic integrity, the sea of subscribing. I mean, you may as well just get that one done like right now off the bat. And then we're at the wishing star. Let's go. As we all know, or at least I'd assume that we'd all know since we've all seen the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, why are you watching an analysis video? The Last Wish is about how Puss in Boots uses up his first 8 lives while being a fairly egotistical, nonchalant frat boy about it, and how he develops as a character as the literal embodiment of death hunts him. Now, this is a really creative concept that was executed fantastically. The problem isn't the story or any other aspect of the film, it was when the movie was released. By the time The Last Wish came out into movie theaters, the 2020s had already produced so many awful movies that took up hours of my life that I only wish I could get back. One would think that with a great movie coming out after years of mediocre films, it would have been received with exceptionally high praise. I remember when Infinity War and The Force Awakens came out, and you couldn't go anywhere for months without hearing people talk about it. With The Last Wish, though, there were a few movie reviews that thought really highly of it, and some people would bring it up in passing, but the praise never reached the amount of hype movies got before 2020. This is because we as an audience went through desensitization. How this works is that over time, as you're repeatedly exposed to something, the need for an emotional response becomes irrelevant. We as an audience didn't become desensitized to movies before 2020 because the Hollywood landscape was so diverse. There were good movies, there were bad movies, there were movies that you'd watch if it was on TV, but you wouldn't go looking for. Each studio would have their fair share of all of these, which is what made it so exciting. You never know what you were gonna get, who was gonna make the next unexpected gem, and who would make the next unanticipated letdown. After the pandemic, though, that landscape changed. Quality became consistent and would consistently come from the same places. For example, Disney made disappointing films with a standout every once in a while, and for the most part, Dreamworks kept making really good films with the occasional letdown. Because the majority of movies released in the 2020s were pretty bad though, that became what we were repeatedly exposed to, so we became desensitized to it. Disappointment became our normal. We were surrounded by bad stories, bad animation, bad music, so much so that we as an audience started going into movies with low expectations and actively looking for those things that made movies bad. This is called the mere exposure effect, which basically means that we tend to develop preferences for things that are familiar to us. It's a type of bias. When it comes to movies, this doesn't mean that we started preferring the bad stuff we were watching. It just means that we developed a preference to look for those bad things rather than the good things because the bad stuff is what became familiar to us. Now, what do we see in The Last Wish? Puss in Boots has become desensitized to the concept of death because, as a cat with 9 lives, he has been repeatedly exposed to it. If the literal embodiment of death was not chasing after him, this desensitization would have continued. We also see Puss exhibit the mere exposure effect when he tells Perito about how he didn't even show up to his own wedding because he was afraid. He was familiar with working on his own and not letting others truly get close to him, so he developed a preference for that lifestyle. We just covered how The Last Wish reflects the general Hollywood landscape. Now let's dive deeper into the 2 main components that make up that relationship: the creators and the audience. If you've seen my Wish video, you'll know how I feel about artistic integrity in film. The basic gist, though, is that during the 2020s movie crash, most studios changed their priorities from simply entertaining audiences to appealing to critics. Because of this, that movie magic we grew up with largely disappeared. We would go to the movie theaters searching for that magic whenever something new came out. But because we know that the chances of us actually finding it now are really slim, we don't see the point in going. I mean, heck, why go to the movie theater when we can just watch it when it goes onto Disney Plus or Netflix? Anyway, all of these creators changed their art so that they could be critically acclaimed, so they could fit a consistent corporate mold, so they could be safe in the industry. After all of his amazing adventures, what do we see Puss do? He changes into a watered-down version of himself, living a disappointing life, all so he can stay safe. It is him taking the chance to keep adventuring despite the danger that represents Dreamworks acknowledging that in order for Hollywood to be happy and healthy again, studios have to take risks and make an attempt to keep telling stories people actually want to hear, trusting that they'll have an audience to fall back on, not just critics. Most of us aren't looking for a woke message or political statement, just a simple story with a good moral. There aren't too many people I know who would rather listen to a really boring 2-hour ad about environmental activism than a beautiful, colorful story about learning to trust and face your fears. Not you. Now, why is this commentary in Puss in Boots of all things? Well, it's because it's a fairy tale. The Wishing Star is a fairy tale. No one thought it was real or possible to find, just as almost no one thinks Hollywood can recover from its current state. But the star was real. It represents the hope that there is for Hollywood. But if nothing gets better, I mean, hey, it was just a fairy tale. Here we are, guys. We've made it to the Wishing Star, but you know what? I think that I've cracked the biggest mystery yet. Death is us. We were the ones who tolerated Hollywood churning out movie after movie that just didn't reach the bar until we finally cracked. We went after the studios, threatening to stop using their streaming services or going to movie theaters entirely, only to see a film that reached our standards right before we did anything detrimental to the industry. So we came back and renewed our loyalties, only for them to be misplaced again as the studios fell back into their mediocre habits. Some of you are probably thinking, how does that last bit make sense? If Puss in Boots is changed by that last fight scene, then isn't this the same deal as Wish, where the studio is promising to get better? And to that, I say no. First of all, Wish is a commentary on the state of the Disney company right now, while The Last Wish is commentary on the current state of Hollywood in its entirety. Second, in that last fight scene, Puss in Boots has his life flash before his eyes.
Lives flashing before your eyes?
No, just one.
As some people have been keen to point out, this isn't true. If Puss was only seeing his most recent life flash before his eyes, we would be seeing clips exclusively from this film. Yet we also see clips from the first film, which arguably happened during his first life and whatever life he was on when the main part of the movie took place. So while he may have become more emotionally honest and less egotistical throughout the movie, his relationship with life and death hasn't actually changed. Now, does this mean that Dreamworks is going to join in on the fun and release a ton of crappy movies with only one good one every once in a while? I don't know. I didn't think so until Ruby Gillman was a thing, and I'm excited but concerned about Kung Fu Panda 4 coming out next year, so honestly, I don't know. What this definitely means, though, is that the 2020s so far have been Hollywood's toxic relationship era, and the red flags, boy oh boy, there have been many. The Last Wish knows it, and it wasn't afraid to call out everyone on what's going on. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you want some more Wishing Star action, make sure to check out the video on the left, and if you want to see what else we have going on here at DRR, check out the video on the right. This was a bit of a sad episode, but stay tuned for next week's video when we go over some of the good stuff Hollywood's been working on. Will we talk about Timothée Chalamet? Who the heck knows? I might change my mind. In the meantime, stay toasty!